Assalamu alaikum and good evening. This is Witness and I'm your host Katrina Hussain. Well, interesting developments taking place on the foreign policy front regarding Pakistan. A flurry of high-level diplomatic visits. First of all, the Indian Foreign Secretary Nirupama Rao is here, meeting with her counterpart Salman Bashir in the Foreign Office. Those talks are going to continue for 2 days. So I suspect we won't have a lot to discuss on that front, but it is important to mention, of course, that she is here. And British Foreign Secretary William Hague is also visiting Pakistan on a one-day visit. Has some positive things to say. A lot of detail will, of course, emerge later on. But the surprise has come from the United States. And as US President Barack Obama has announced a drawdown in troops from next summer, probably next July. These were troops that had been sent in a troop surge in December 2009. Excuse me. Now, these are 33,000 troops that have been added and they're going to be drawn down as of next summer. And the Americans expect the Afghans to take more responsibility for safety and security within their borders. However, there has been a flurry of statements that have come out from Washington in the past few hours that are leaving Pakistan probably confused. We haven't received any reaction from the government as yet. But Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, for example, says the United States is not prepared to continue the same levels of military aid to Pakistan unless it sees some changes in the relationship. She was addressing a Senate committee. And her exact words were, when it comes to our military aid, we are not prepared to continue providing that at the pace we were providing it, unless and until we see some steps taken. She did not specify what those steps were. Meanwhile, Robert Gates also jumped into the fray, and he told a private news agency at the French news agency in Washington that success is possible in the war in Afghanistan, even if Pakistan fails to fully cooperate in countering militants along the border. And he, of course, also talked about the fact that President Obama chose not to follow the advice of US Commander General David Petraeus, who favored a slower reduction of surge forces. And that was Robert Gates. Meanwhile, Admiral Mike Mullen also was addressing the House Armed Services Committee, and he said that there is no jumping ship here. Quite to the contrary, we will have the disposal of the great bulk of surge forces through this and most of the next fighting season. So that's basically a spring in Afghanistan. Now, of course, there are some issues. It seems that Admiral Mike Mullen is not fully convinced about Barack Obama's decision to draw down those troops, but of course that is their problem. Our problem is, how is it going to affect us and the decisions that we need to take and the strategy we need to develop. Sooner would be better. If somebody out there is listening, allow me to introduce my guests here in the studio. My first guest, Dr. Rifat Hussain, a defense analyst and professor of peace and security studies at Quaid-e-Azam University. My second guest today, former Ambassador Salim Nawaz Gandapur. And my third guest today, Brigadier Retired Said Nazir Mohammed, who is a defense analyst. I welcome you all to today's program. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Rifat, it's a tricky statement coming from Hillary Clinton. She doesn't say what steps need to be taken. I'm going to assume that that has been conveyed to the Pakistani authorities. We know US President Barack Obama addressed the nation. He also spoke on the telephone to President Zardari. What's going on?
Well, I think difficult times ahead for Pakistan, because Barack Obama in his speech, if you ignore the rhetoric, focusing on Pakistan, he said that we insist on Pakistan doing its share of cooperation. Along with that, now you have Hillary Clinton saying that the same levels of military aid cannot continue, and we have to revise that unless some steps are taken. And by those steps, I would infer they mean that the sanctuaries, the safe havens, which they think are operating from the Pakistan side, those needs to be dismantled, and Pakistan needs to get after the remnants of the Al-Qaeda and its affiliates. And therefore, the Americans are not using the phrase do more, but essentially they are implying that the economic and the military aid that Pakistan is receiving will become conditional on Pakistan's response and the effectiveness with which Pakistan tackles this problem of safe havens and sanctuaries.
Can we use words like blackmail in international
Well,
diplomacy?
I would say not blackmail, but it is definitely arm twisting.
Okay.
And the Americans have played good and bad cop, and Hillary Clinton now has chosen not to be the good cop. She has become increasingly strident in her demand that Pakistan has not done its share, and now she has explicitly linked the provision of military aid to Pakistan with certain concrete visible steps being taken. So I think the relationship between Pakistan and the United States is going to experience further turbulence given Obama's new approach towards Afghanistan, in which he has also clearly said that Al-Qaeda has been put on the path to defeat, but the sanctuaries remain there. And he also went ahead and in that speech he said that as long as I am the President of the United States, I will ensure that these safe havens are not used to threaten the United States. So I think the entire focus is now going to be on Pakistan, and therefore we need to come up with a very urgent response, and we need to think through our responses to how we are going to deal with this rather new situation.
Ambassador, of course, I know you have been working on a project to try and develop some kind of strategy. At this point, with the Americans stepping up the pressure, what kind of strategy do you think Pakistan needs to adopt? And do you think Pakistan is clear on what is required right now?
If you permit me to briefly refer to one or two things. I just saw the ticker today that ISAF and Pakistani forces clashed. Now, this must have happened in the last few days.
Yes, there's also been a statement about that.
A statement about
yeah.
looking into it. There have been attacks from Afghanistan and 200, 400 people, which cannot conceivably happen with American technology without their prior knowledge. So this has been, in my view, a continued usage, but a more frequent usage of pressure on Pakistan. Allow me also to recall October last year, where after building up General Kiani to be one of the gifts of God to the free world, he was given the extraordinary privilege of calling on President Obama and got an earful for the meeting, most of it, 40, 45 minutes. At the end of which he handed over a document to President Obama saying this is, in Pakistan's view, are American strategic mistakes in Afghanistan and what Pakistan thinks that America might do to improve the chances of its...
Ambassador, this document, is it similar to the one that he handed over in Brussels to the NATO?
I am not sure, but
okay.
The broad parameters must be similar.
Sure.
But this one, I'm sure, was addressed specifically to the Americans, and I think people have reported that President Obama was a bit shocked.
A bit shocked?
Yes, because he was in the process of giving an earful and not expecting any response, but maybe a click of heels.
Which has traditionally been what other people have been doing.
Other people. Unfortunately, that has to be kept in mind. That is where the slide speeded up. They tried to play good cop, as my friend has just pointed out. They've now decided to increase or up the ante with Pakistan. Now, very interestingly, another thing that the chief did today in South Waziristan was in effect tell the tribals that the moment they were prepared to take up the defenses of their own limited area, FATA, that the Pakistan army would withdraw. Also, he started or laid the foundation of a number of development projects.
A cadet college as well, if I'm not mistaken.
As well. Now, quite honestly, the government of Pakistan has been derelict, the government and the armed forces too, in not having conceived of this as essential steps a decade ago, or even longer. And therefore, a lot of eggs, a lot of chickens are coming home to roost precisely because the population, I remember one of my colleagues, Ayaz Wazir, who comes from South Waziristan, was today on television expressing precisely the view that on the one hand, there's the armed forces, which has a purpose, which uses military power. On the other hand are the Taliban. I'm not talking of those Taliban who basic intent is to get the Americans out of
That's the
Afghanistan
Afghan
on a
Taliban,
nationalist basis. But those Taliban with whom we've been having problems, the population of FATA, and they're limitless numbers now. They're broken up in so many little pieces. Drugs are involved, so Taliban are not necessarily that high pedestal of Islamic revivalism that we've been thinking about. But it has been the government. And you referred to the strategy that we have prepared. That precisely demands that all centers of national power today, instead of going at each other's throats in some cases, need to grow up, put their heads together, and decide what is the vital national interest. First of all, today's stability. Second, resistance against external pressure. Third, unfortunate divisions at home which are growing. And many of our other economic problems which are grave, but in my view, fairly avoidable, fairly amendable, improvable.
Right.
And we are failing there.
Okay, we are going to focus today predominantly on the security situation, because that is really what I want to do today. Brigadier Momin, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for joining us. A drawdown of troops in Afghanistan in about a year, but there will still be enough troops there. We're not talking the Americans are leaving. They're certainly not leaving. What impact, direct impact, do you think that will have on Pakistan's security situation, first of all?
Yes, this what is probably the most concerning question which Pakistan is facing today. I suppose this step of withdrawal and countdown should be taken in a positive sense for Pakistan as well as for the region. Number one, the military instrument is receding and the political instrument is proceeding to take over. So that is for the stability of the region. Number two, the de-escalation in the military terms or the withdrawal of any commander speaks there they are leaving and we are staying. So if they are having some bad cop or sort of coercive diplomacy, so that is not going to work more in the withdrawal situation because they will be on the reverse front.
Right.
And once the troops will be decreasing in Afghanistan, so the Taliban and the resistance will be getting popularity as well as strength and ground. So because they will be taking over. Once they will be taking over, so naturally Pakistan diplomacy as well as contacts will come into play. So by saying that probably they can do without Pakistan, that is a bit of kill. Or it is a high statement, I say.
Like, coming from Robert Gates, it was quite unexpected.
Because they have not yet done without Pakistan enough, so how they can do after the withdrawal enough without Pakistan.
Okay. Well, it's time for us to take a short commercial break. When we return, the very crucial question, election year coming up in the United States. The American public is tired of war. They're tired of body bags. Always have had a low threshold post-Vietnam. What kind of impact is that going to have? Is that going to speed up the timetable? And is the United States looking for a scapegoat in case things go wrong? Stay with us. This and more after a short break. Welcome back to Witness. Well, the crucial aspect of this whole situation, of course, is that America faces an election year, 2012. President Barack Obama is not quite a lame duck president, but he has problems at home. And one of the big things he needs to do is to show a success. Now, Osama bin Laden's killing on May 2nd will definitely be helping him. But ratcheting up the pressure on Pakistan, does that help electorally? We'll talk about that. But more crucially, Brigadier Saab, one of the very, very crucial issues that one has to think about at this point is that a troop drawdown in Afghanistan, now it's not a lot. 33,000 will leave next summer, that's July 2012, and 68,000 will still be in Afghanistan. So we're not talking a vacuum, we're not talking the Soviet withdrawal of 1988. What impact will this have? Will the Americans be able to deal with the border problems? As the ambassador mentioned, there was a border incident between ISAF and Pakistani troops, has been resolved. But right now, Pakistan has far more troops on this side of the border. And still we can't deal with the infiltration and exfiltration of people moving across that border. Is that going to make any difference on our security within our own country?
Yes, of course it is going to make a difference. If they are withdrawing on the same time, we are supposed to be de-escalating on the war on terror, because now we have to move from the military instrument from the deterrence, we have to go to the dialogue as well as the development. Unless we do that homework and launch it now, so the things will not improve on our border, number one. Number two, that once the Americans are leaving about 68,000 troops, and they say that even beyond 2014, we will be having combatants. And I think they will be having the bases like Bagram, from where they will be using their long stick, the Air Force, where there will be instability or some sort of uprising. So they will be definitely using that. But at the same time, the de-escalation itself or the withdrawal itself is a positive sign that will give a message to the warring faction in Afghanistan that probably peace is coming and the hope for the peace will develop.
Do you also see that this pressure that now Secretary Clinton, President Obama, Clinton is being very direct, two ways to look at it. Either they're looking for a scapegoat or they expect Pakistan to take the bulk of dealing with the war on terror in this region. How do you see it?
I suppose at this point in time, they have got a face saving. The Osama is no more there, as well as they have fought for a decade. And at the home front, people are asking for withdrawal and no more tax money is to be given to be spent. $440 billion so far spent, $120 billion per annum. So this is definitely going to be decreased. That is the home front pressure. As far as Pakistan is concerned, and if they are not giving the aid, as they say, so we will not be using our troops and we will be de-escalating. So at the same time, we will be also conserving on the expenditure and will be minding our own business to mend our fences or make roads with our people with whom we are at war. So okay, I suppose that development should be on both sides of the fence. It will no more, I suppose there will be no more asking for the Haqqani network to be dismantled, because they will be in the future one of the political force to be inducted. And to
okay, I'm surprised you see it that way. Ambassador, do you believe that the Haqqani network could be part of a future political setup in Afghanistan?
I think I agree with a number of points that my colleague has made. Let me very briefly, if you permit me, to touch upon what's happening within the United States very briefly. Number one, the greatest creditor nation of the 20th century with 40% of the world's GDP has now come down to 25%. It's the most indebted nation on earth. Since the beginning of the 21st century, more than 10% of Americans' combat troops are either dead or disabled physically or so traumatized they will not be able to return to war. Some $80 billion are being cut from their combat troops, particularly in the Army and the Marines, between now and 2017. Their present rate of unemployment, which hovers around 9%, will return to a more normal 5.5%, according to American estimates, earliest by 2017. Then there are the body bags. Then there is also the question of the difference between reality and rhetoric. It was the Americans, if you recall, had 550,000 troops at their maximum in Vietnam.
In Vietnam.
They did withdraw less than gracefully. So they find themselves today, they may not be willing to admit, but they find themselves today in a position where they need genuinely a face saving. Now, the question of their wanting to stay on beyond 2014 will depend on a number of things. Who's in the White House? What is the state of the US economy? What do the American people think about a war which will then have gone on for 13 years? the longest in American history.
That's right.
And why should a mother in New Orleans lose a 20-year-old in Afghanistan? How does Afghanistan threaten today the safety and security of the United States of America?
Critical point that you raised there right at the end. Dr. Rifat, the state at which Al-Qaeda is in today, I don't know if the Al-Qaeda or any of its various offshoots are in any position to threaten the United States like they did in September 2001. Where exactly does America plan to take this war, in your opinion? And again, what should we be doing ourselves?
Well, two quick points. I think regardless of the American difficulties, which are real, which are genuine, and Obama in his speech has mentioned all those, the financial difficulties, the human cost, and the need for America to build nation at home rather than do the nation building in Afghanistan. Notwithstanding that, I think the American strategy is to lower the expectations, no longer do the counterinsurgency, and do the counterterrorism from a very focused and from a narrow perspective. That's why I think his speech does not even talk about the civilian surge or diplomatic surge. It essentially talks about a counterterrorism strategy, which means that the Americans are selectively going to use a combination of their ground forces, which essentially are the special forces, rely on their air force and particularly the drone attacks, and then rely on intelligence to hit the sanctuaries wherever they are. So the focus is on the sanctuaries, and unfortunately in the American judgment the sanctuaries are not on the Afghanistan side of the border, they are on this side of the border, which means that Pakistan is being now targeted as the potential pivotal point of the American counterterrorism strategy. So regardless whether America can sustain this war in the longer run or not, I think the next 2 years are going to be absolutely crucial. And Obama in his speech underlined the fact that as long as I am the President of the United States, I would not let these sanctuaries threaten the United States. Now,
can they?
No, right now they may not, but the point is that they think that the planning for attack against the United States, and it doesn't have to be the attacks like 9/11. There can be attacks on the American troops. After all, 68,000 troops would still be there after the surge is completed next year. So therefore, the Americans are very worried that where the supply lines are going to come from, will they be disrupted, where is the fuel, and then so what is going to happen to the safety and security of 68,000 troops. So so I think this means a realistic assessment on the part of the Pakistani planners to look at the situation, because there are new facts that are being created, and the focus is essentially Pakistan. It is no longer Afghanistan. So that means a lot of danger, lot of risk for Pakistan.
And do you think that the Pakistani policymakers, including the politicians, Parliament, the President, the Prime Minister, have any concept of what is going on?
Unfortunately, regretfully I have to say this, that we are not even aware of the dangers that we are surrounded by right now, and the very fact that Obama's speech has evoked no official reaction from Pakistan is so tells you a lot. I think we should have focused on this, we should have prepared a strategy, but we do not even have a verbal strategy, I mean, let alone talking of a effective, coherent military strategy. So we are still in a reactive mode, and I think the more we stay in that reactive mode, we are losing very precious time. We need to become proactive, and we need to think of an option whereby United States is no longer on our side. And when Robert Gates says that we can fight this war and win this war without Pakistan's cooperation, that tells you a lot.
That was actually a very scary thought. Now here, of course, I am looking at an academic, a diplomat, and a military security analyst. The three categories which should be drawn on to put together a strategy. Can I ask all three of you gentlemen, have you ever been approached by the government of Pakistan to come to a think tank, a policy meeting, give your inputs? Any of you ever been invited?
No.
Well, I cannot claim that dubious distinction.
Okay. So. The reason I laugh is because I've asked this question to a numerous amount of people for whom I have tremendous respect, including all of you, and the answer has been no. Ambassador, this is a tricky point over here now. Where and when is Pakistan's leadership going to wake up and realize that the existential problem facing this country is not coalition politics?
I think let me say one thing. Well, we as a group have tried to foist ourselves on the government. Our a suggested national security strategy paper has been lying with the People's Party for many months. They haven't yet had time to open it and have a look at it. We briefed Mia Nawaz Sharif on the 14th of June. We've, as you'd recall, we invited you and other members of the media. Unfortunately, you were impossibly committed, so you couldn't come. But we did meet some people in the press. And I'd say, for example, let me say that the Institute of Strategic Studies in Islamabad, in my humble opinion, has been more alert to the realities around Pakistan than it's been in a very, very long time.
Even the
Ambassador Ashraf Jahangir Qazi, who's
Yes.
also been, he's a very, there is one of the few government-linked officials who seems to have a thinking head on his shoulders and a concerned heart. So there is that little hope, but it's clearly insufficient because at this time, the only coalition Pakistan needs is in which every stakeholder is a member.
That's a phrase we hear fairly often. We're going to take a short commercial break. When we return, the crucial point, the flashpoints in Pakistan. FATA, certainly. Balochistan, crucial. These are the two areas where we seem to be unwilling to spend money, time, resources. We'll talk about that, but after a short break. Please stay right here. Welcome back to Witness. One of the problems we have here in Pakistan is that we have so many crises every day. If Balochistan, the missing persons, the target killings in Karachi, the bombings, the terror, the poverty, the inflation, I could go on forever. Everyone worries about what is happening in their immediate circle of vicinity. That's natural. We worry about what affects us first. So sometimes FATA and Balochistan are too remote from the national consciousness, if I can use that word. A young man, Sarfraz Shah, gunned down in cold blood by the Rangers in Karachi, captured the attention of not just every Pakistani, but worldwide diaspora and many more people. But how often do we know about what life is like in the tribal areas? And that's why, Brigadier Saab, I'm going to ask you to move away for a second from your analysis role and just tell us, what is life like in the tribal areas post 9/11?
I suppose the Armitage who gave the warning that we will take you back to the Stone Age.
Yes.
So we are nearing, the tribal area is nearing the Stone Age due to this war on terror. For the reason that the warring factions are fighting and the grass is being, that is the common people, that is being trampled by the elephants. The IDPs, they never get the treatment which the IDPs of Swat got. The compensation which is given to the collateral damages in other parts of the country, they are never given in the tribal area. Then the access to the road, the checkposts, then the demolition of the schools as well as the hospitals and other buildings.
And who's doing
so
these
the life
demolitions?
has come really that the population has got sparse and the local trade and business has gone down. The economy is no more, what to talk of thriving, rather it is coming down on knees.
Who is responsible for the demolition of the schools and the hospitals and the clinics?
Actually, the rent of the government is on the government buildings as well as the roads. The government is supposed to protect it, not the locals.
Right.
There is a clause of collective responsibility in the FCR. But that collective responsibility is there once an odd incident takes place. But once there is a sort of armed insurrection or a sort of fight which is taking place with heavy weapons, So naturally, that cannot be controlled by the local people.
What,
So
unfair question over here, but when you've got Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, you've got people who are possibly taking shelter from the Afghanistan side, you've got militants who are fighting for their survival, along with local feuds which haven't gone away and which have been going on for hundreds of years. What percentage, ballpark, estimate, do you feel are people who are just trapped, as you said, the grass being trampled? What percentage of the population, roughly, is the grass that's being trampled?
I suppose it's more than 50%.
More than 50%? Because I would actually put it maybe at 70%. But
I'm giving this estimate that at times a lull comes in an agency, it takes another pop-up in another agency, and then it's coming again. So due to that period difference, this I'm putting it at 50%.
The militants are mobile. We know the militants are mobile. In fact,
so
in break,
there will be a short lull, a brief peace. So you can say we have done our operations and the things are normal. But next moment, after 3 months, 4 months, again there will be.
It's like a cancer that keeps popping up in different. You know.
But the solution to the problem is no more fighting, no more operations, no more do-mores. I suppose we had enough. And now the National Assembly, whatsoever the resolution is, that develop and dialogue. Unless you come to that, this thing is not going to finish. And plus, the population is more getting rather, they are not only embarrassed, but they are frustrated with the state of affairs.
And that's true for the whole country. Dr. Rifat, I'll leave the last words for you, but Ambassador, in the break, of course, we also talked about the movement. Now, the militants are able to move from agency to agency. The army moves into one agency, whether it's Oraksai or wherever. The militants simply move. It's not that hard to do. And you mentioned in the break the movement of the Punjabi Taliban back and forth from the tribal areas. What's going on?
I think what is going on is a point we haven't touched upon, is foreign interference of a colossal and very dangerous proportions. I mean, in Balochistan, it is quite clear that a number of friends, and not just the United States, are also involved. And
let's take names. We know that, for example, in Quetta, a bus carrying Shia pilgrims are shot. We know that it's sectarian. So are you also saying that that's a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia?
I'm absolutely positive. Having been on the Iran desk for 5 years, I'm absolutely positive that it happens. And it's been going on, unfortunately, since the revolution in Iran took place. And the
so briefly,
Afghan
I want
war,
to also take Dr.
the Afghan war, it's been going on in Pakistan, and you can see.
Who's facilitating the movement of militants from Punjab to the tribal areas and back?
Well, that's $1 million question, because it can only be someone who has links with the government or the government itself. How else?
The government?
Well, how else can large numbers of people move back and forth when citizens of FATA are having problems getting back home and getting back out into Pakistan? If they have problems, as a friend of mine from the tribal areas, he'll tell you the locals have greater problems moving in and out than the Taliban from other parts.
Dr. Rifat, what is your reaction to that? What is your sense?
My reaction is that I think what has happened in the last 10 years or so is that there is a networking of all these groups, militant groups, and they are now ganging up on the Pakistani state. And that's why you have this movement of people. Sometimes they may use official links, but a lot of time these people have the capability, they have the resources, they have the autonomy and the will to move from one area to the other. And that's why a lot of these people, for example, the banned Punjabi militant groups, they have moved to FATA area because they thought
like Jaish-e-Mohammed,
Lashkar-e-Taiba, the very fact that the operation that we had in the Lal Masjid, there were a lot of people from Waziristan, the youth that actually was using this mosque as a sanctuary. So you have this two-way traffic, and this is happening despite the efforts of the government to keep a watch on this. That's one dimension. But what worries me the most is that, we have been talking about, the drawdown of the American troops, is that we are already now suffering from the pulling and the thinning out of the American troops along the Badakhshan and the Kunar area, because that is the area which is now being used by the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan and its friends, including Mullah Fazlullah, because they are the people who are regrouping there, they have a sanctuary there, and there is no external check on them. If the Americans are going to further thin out their troops, I think Pakistan will become much more vulnerable to the cross-border attacks from Afghanistan into, not only into FATA, but also into the settled areas of Pakistan.
Absolutely.
So I think this is a huge the third dimension of our internal security challenge that we are facing. So I think this is something that we need to focus on. And my humble suggestion is that we need to craft a local solution, regardless of how whether Americans are going to stay there, whether there is going to be a surge or not. I think we have to treat this as a huge internal security challenge, and which requires,
fully endorsed.
Fully endorsed.
Fully
All
endorsed.
of you also agree that that's crucial. We are out of time, unfortunately, but I will invite all three of you back again, because this is such a crucial subject. But right now I'd like to thank Dr. Rifat Hussain, Ambassador Salim Nawaz Gandapur, and Brigadier Retired Syed Nazir Mohammed. Thank you so much for having joined us here tonight on Witness. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the very crucial aspects about all this is the fact that unfortunately many people think that the problems in Afghanistan and the problems in Balochistan do not affect you. Well, here's a news alert. It does. What happens in Afghanistan will directly impact the security and stability of each and every Pakistani, as Dr. Rifat just pointed out at the end, that problems that are brewing in the tribal areas or in Balochistan, all the problems in Afghanistan are going to affect each and every person here in Pakistan. We don't think of it as our problem. It is. Let's hope that the government wakes up at some point from its deep slumber and does something before we have to wring our hands and say, oh, I wish we'd done this sooner. Katrina Hussain saying Khuda Hafiz from Islamabad.